Yeah, I'm gonna be showing you guys some Photoshop skills today. Some different ways to really think about photography, to think about your photos. So I work for a lot of big global brands. No fault of my own. I fell into that accidentally because I kind of lived in the right place and made a few of the right mistakes and got hired by the right shops. And so I came up working for like Nike and you know, Coca-Cola and all these really big brands, and they, you know, they use photography to speak to all of their customers. And you know, it's really, I always urge people to look at that imagery landscape a little bit differently than just taking it for granted. Because if you want to work for anybody, and that, you know, depends on, you could be, you know, a maternity photographer, you could be automotive, you could be landscape, but you could also be commercial. I mean, it's kind of all commercial. You could be wanting to work for, you know, to shoot for Target because they initiated a campaign where they deliberately are photographing women in much more of an honest and authentic way. So that might speak to you. Look at the imagery that these brand entities are creating and see what that voice is that they're speaking with, because you can really use that to craft, you know, the types of shoots and the types of styles that you want to use in your photography. I think a lot of photographers get stuck by going, well, what am I going to shoot next? Like, you know, I just got to like find something, or like, you know, all these other photographers out there are better than me because they just come up with these incredible ideas that just pop in their mind. I always urge people to think about the client that you want to make photography for, and then understand, go out there and look and maybe mood board or collect imagery that your avatars are making, those brands are making. What are they already making? And then go out and make some stuff like that. Go ahead and steal. I'm just curious how many people in the audience are straight up photographers as opposed to straight up retouchers, or somewhere in between. If you're straight up like photographer who uses Photoshop when someone twists their arm behind their back, raise your hand. No shame in that. Because Photoshop is a space where you can have a lot of your time sucked out of you. To go in there and to figure out how to do something to your photograph that's got to get done could take you, you know, could take you hours if it's not something you're doing every single day. So that's one of my goals and missions, is to take a lot of these really high-end sort of secret tools and techniques that high-end retouchers have been using for years and years, and change those, make them accessible to everyday photographers, to people who don't look forward to going back to the studio and having to jump into Photoshop because maybe they didn't get something, or maybe there was something in the frame that needs to get taken out. There can be a lot of fear around that, and I'm just doing my best to help everybody get over that.
Ovdje je bolji zvuk, a to mi je bolja slika.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Sorry, no.
That's all right.
It was a mistake. I didn't see that she's not muted.
Oh, no worries.
Everything is okay.
Cool. And yeah, you guys, I'm going to be showing you some images today that hopefully, I'm going to share my screen here just real quick. Okay, you guys seeing Photoshop there?
Yeah, we can.
So I'm going to be just showing you some tips and tricks, but also a sort of broader methodology that you can use end to end on every image you work on. And my techniques work on all different kinds of images. I think what a lot of people get wrong is they think that, oh, you're an automotive retoucher, or you're a portrait retoucher, or landscape, or commercial. And what I've had to develop over the years of working is tools and techniques and just a general approach that works on every single different kind of image. So I'm not an automotive retoucher, I'm not a beverage retoucher, I'm just a pixel retoucher. And I approach every single photograph with that kind of mentality. All we're dealing with is just a collection of pixels. That's it. So I was working with a photographer a couple weeks ago, and she had this problem with this image that she was trying to solve. While the exposure was great for this woman in this incredible photograph, this is my friend Jade Webb, Jaded Light Photography. She captured this moment, but she needed to change the exposure for the man because there was, you know, she couldn't light this in a way that made it perfect for both of the figures here. And she was trying all sorts of different things, and she hit me up to ask me, and I was like, oh, that's, you know, she's like, this would probably take you just a couple minutes, right? And it's like, yeah, this would probably just take me a couple minutes. And I'll show you how to do this, because this is a really great, easy way to fix an image. I call it raw bracketing. So you've already got the shot. You've got the image in camera raw. One thing I want to show you too is I'm going to just close this and open up the original raw image. No, I clicked on the PSD. Sorry about that. Okay, raw file. I just clicked on the .nef file, so this is what you'd expect when you open a raw file, right? One thing I want to show you guys, every time I open a raw file into Photoshop, it opens as a smart object. And so if I click down here, it brings up these settings. Camera raw preferences. A lot of people don't know this exists, but just click open in Photoshop as smart objects. You never have to set that again. Every time you open a raw file in Photoshop, it's now going to be smart object. You can see this over here in my layers palette. Now, all that means, we don't need to go deep into smart objects. All that means is that right now, since this is a raw file, I can double click on it, and I can go right back in to the raw settings. So it didn't render that into Photoshop as a flat image. It's keeping it as that raw file. So that's really, really valuable, because what I want are basically two exposures from this raw file. And as you probably know, the best place to do big exposure changes is on a raw file. But I need two, so how am I going to do that? I want to create another layer from this raw file, but I don't want to just duplicate the layer. I'll show you what happens if I just duplicate it. Now I've got two smart objects of that raw file. No difference. Now I'm going to click on, double click on the first one, the original. I'm going to change the exposure. Let's just crank that up a little bit. Click OK. Now look, that changed the exposure for both of these layers because I duplicated that raw file. So it thinks it's the same thing. I'm going to show you how to get around that. Let's go back in there and just remove that change that I made. Set it right around the original exposure. And what I want to do, I'm right clicking on this layer. I'm going to say new smart object via copy. So that makes a new independent smart object here that contains all the same information, but they're not linked anymore. So I'm going to double click on that new smart object that I just made via copy. And I am going to open up some of these darker areas. I can open up the exposure a little bit, but the beautiful thing about working in Camera Raw is it's got all this data to work with, all this information that's been captured by the camera in the RAW file. So we can really make big changes to RAW files, but once those flatten out into Photoshop, we have a lot less information to work with. So I'm going to click OK. So great, there's my new exposure. I've got the original here, which is great for this woman. And then I've got one here that's great for the man, but how do I combine those? I'm just going to add a mask to this new layer so it only reveals this guy. And Photoshop has some cool tools. I know once I know that I just probably said mask, and some photographers in the audience were like, oh man, that's where you lost me. I don't want to go in and make masks. Photoshop is now providing a ton of new tools for masking that do a really, really good job without you having to spend hours sitting there like painting the perfect mask. And some of these tools I even use now in my work, whereas in the past I've gotten really good at like using the pen tool to clip every single thing out in an image. These tools are really great. I'm going to show you the one that I've been using a lot lately. It's the object selection tool. So it's really, really simple. All you do is just drag a marquee around the object you want to select, and Photoshop's going to do its best to figure out what it is you meant. And it did a really pretty good job there. I'm going to zoom in. I'm just going to switch this to, this is just a different view of a selection here. Just so you can see a sort of different representation of the selection, I just hit Q to change it to quick mask. So you can see around the hair there's, you know, a bit to be desired, but it was pretty accurate. But if you want to get a little bit better, the other really cool tool you need to know about is select and mask. Now, if you've never been into this select and mask environment, all of these sliders might be looking a little bit complex for you. Just don't worry about that. The only tool that we care about, if I can get to it, I think this is because I entered it when I was in full screen. So what I'm dealing with is one of my palettes was hidden. Let me go back into select and mask. Oh, it's because they put it over here. So the only brush I really care about right now is this one called Refine Edge. And I'll show you how easy it is to use to make this edge better. All I do is just get a radius that somewhat isn't, how do I explain that? Not too big, not too small. Somewhere around here. And all I'm going to do is just paint over the edge of his hair. And Photoshop, once again, does a bunch of really smart calculations to give me this incredible mask edge. Let's see if I can do before and after. That was before. That's after. Look how incredible that is. Because I don't know about you, but masking hair is probably my least favorite thing in the entire world. So you can do that all along the edge just to improve it. Where that is jaggy. Photoshop is now very smart when it comes to figuring out what you want to improve and what you want to leave behind. So there's a lot of stuff that I missed here, like this entire hand. I'm just going to click OK. Remember, this is still a live selection, so I can go in there and refine it more. I can use like the quick selection tool or even the magic wand tool. If I hold down Alt, I can just click in areas and hope that Photoshop there we go. Sorry about that. I was undoing. So just with these pretty simple tools, you can just try stuff. These are all the ones that you need to know for making pretty quick selections. And just holding down Alt will subtract some of the selection, and if there's a little plus there, you know it's adding. So that's a pretty quick isolation of something that if I had to do it by hand, would have taken a pretty long time. And now what I've got are two different exposures in this image that really unify it and bring it together. Is this something that you guys have run into in your work ever, where maybe a part of the image is good, you got it back to the house, you got it off the camera, and there's just an area of the image that you just didn't know how to isolate to do the right thing? I know I've run into that constantly because I'm not the best photographer in the world, and I always run into something that I didn't consider, or a photograph that I really loved a part of, but I just couldn't, print it. I just couldn't, give it a 5-star rating in Lightroom because there was just a part of the image that didn't come out right. These are the tools that I use now on my own photography because they're really fast and just really effective. I'm pretty impressed by Photoshop. I used to actually really kind of hate on these tools because I thought they were, and they weren't really that great for a long time, but now they work really, really well. So I just encourage you to start jumping into these, not being afraid of making selections and masks in your images, because Photoshop is killing it on that front. So, hey, Marco, I can't see the chat because I had it closed. Does anybody else, anybody have any questions? Because That's one thing I wanted to say up front too, is when you guys ask me stuff or you interrupt me, that really helps me, first of all, not ramble on, which I've been known to do, but also respond to your specific questions, stuff that really applies to you.
You have few of them. The first, Milutin is asking, what version of Photoshop is that?
This is the most recent version, which is 21.2. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you're running on Creative Cloud, you're going to be able to continually stay up to date with Photoshop. I know that doesn't work for everybody because not everybody wants to be paying monthly to get Photoshop. But a lot of these tools, you know, if you're going back to CS6, you know, like the object selection tool isn't going to be there. This is a pretty recent development. And this is a really, you know, also a good reason to stay up to date with Photoshop. Like back in the day, like, you know, 5-10 years ago, I was also in that camp of like, I don't need the, you know, most recent version because I can do everything I need to do. Now I'm really an advocate for staying up to date because there's just so much development going on for Photoshop now. Some really, really exciting stuff. And there's going to be some pretty incredible stuff coming out this year in Photoshop.
Dennis is saying that select and masks are very helpful. It makes defining the edges of masks so much easier. You might still need to finesse it a bit by hand, but much less than before. Select and mask has been a part of Photoshop for several versions. The latest one is better, but earlier versions are useful too.
Dennis, you sound like you used Photoshop before. That's surprising. I didn't think you were very good at it, but it sounds like you might be. What's up, Mario? I didn't see you there. My buddy Mario is on, is in the room with us too. He's a pretty incredible artist. Boom, fist bump. So this image here is what I want to use to kind of introduce you guys into a different way of thinking about your photographs in Photoshop. Because I think in the future, I really believe that we're going to change the way that we approach manipulations in our photography in Photoshop. Right now, what we're using are all of these really great tools in Photoshop, the clone stamp tool, the healing brush tool, all those selection tools, content aware fills. These are really, really advanced tools. The only problem is that they're all working currently just on an image that has all of the visual information on a single layer. That's a problem, because until we break that tradition in how we work on our images, we're always going to be up against some really fundamental problems. In all sorts of industries, we break complex problems down into component parts, and that's exactly what I'm going to be focusing on today. It's how can you break your photograph down into a couple component parts so it makes tackling previously really tough problems a whole lot easier. So when I think about images now, like I said, they're just a collection of pixels. And what are these pixels describing? They're describing color, they're describing contrast, but visually they're also describing different qualities of the image. You can see back here in the background, everything's out of focus. And then in the foreground, there's a lot of sharper focus, sharper detail, sharper texture. And so what I want to do is not have to deal with those two components at the same time. For instance, let's say that let's say the client asked me to remove the puppy because they're evil and they hate puppies. So I could try to use the clone stamp tool. I'm just sort of sampling from areas that I think might work, but they're moving into, these sharper areas of detail. This is just a hugely painful cloning task that I would not want to have to tackle myself in this way. I could try to use a different tool in Photoshop, which is really, really powerful and you should know about. I'm just drawing a selection around using the lasso tool. Doesn't have to be perfect. With my layer selected, I'm going to go up to Edit, Fill. And what a lot of people don't know, in this drop down right here, you can choose Content Aware. This is really, really useful. So this is telling Photoshop, I basically want to remove this thing, but I don't want to do it myself. Can you please help? Click OK. Awesome. Well, not totally awesome, but that was a lot of work that Photoshop took off my plate. Now I could go back in and continue to refine this using those traditional tools, but look what Photoshop had a problem doing. It had a real problem distinguishing this out of focus stuff in the image, right? It maybe pulled it from out here. It was looking around, well, what should I fill this area with? And in here, it sort of thought that, oh, I need to fill this with something sharper. So you can tell that Photoshop's Content Aware engine was really working hard to try to figure out just what I was talking about. What sharp stuff do I need to bring in and what soft stuff do I need to bring in? So it's struggling with those problems too, which has always proven to me thinking about the image in this way is exactly what Photoshop's doing. So why are we working on an image where all of that visual information is all sandwiched together on one single flat layer? Why don't we take those visual components apart, work on them separately? So what I did was I came up with an action here that's based on frequency separation. I'm going to show you what these steps are, but really quickly, I just want to run this action and show you that I can actually process my photograph in a way that doesn't change the way it looks, but just breaks those visual components out onto different layers. This comes from a process called frequency separation, but it's really not a useful term for anybody. I just refer to the different parts of the image in terms of texture and tone, and I'm going to run my action without even focusing on any of these dialogues because I'm going to show you how this works in just a minute. And I'm going to show you how to do it yourself. Okay, so we've got a bunch of different layers in here that, if you've never seen this before, probably look pretty weird. But what I've done with these layers is just process my image so that I can see this tone on a separate layer. And then I can see all the detail on a separate layer too. So I'm just turning a layer on and off. This is my texture layer. So if I turn off the entire group here that I just processed the image, you notice there's no visual change whatsoever. That's important. But now I can work on these two separate visual components independently. So I'm going to click on my tone workspace, and I'm going to draw that same selection around this dog, this puppy. I've gotten so much flack for what I do to this puppy, because people are like, why would you take a puppy out of a photograph? And I'm like, I'm not a monster. This is just something that clients ask for. So let's turn this off. So I turned off my texture. We're just looking at the tone. It didn't go away. I'm going to do the same thing. Go to Edit, Fill, Content Aware Fill. Okay. Photoshop is doing its magic. Cool. It had some of the same problems, but this is way less pronounced than it was previously in terms of the errors that Photoshop was getting. And it makes it so much easier for me to use like the healing brush tool. To really fix some of these problem areas that Photoshop couldn't really solve for me. So what I've done is I've alleviated having to rely on Photoshop to calculate a whole ton of stuff all together at once. I've basically given Photoshop a little break. Now, I mean, if we're just looking at the tone of the image, I mean, this is another way to demonstrate it. This is the tone, and there's the texture back. It hasn't gone anywhere. But that change, which took me just about 5 minutes, which is a pretty complicated retouch even for a pro, that was pretty easy. That's something pretty much anybody could do. So let's turn back on the texture. Okay, so there's still a little bit of puppy in there, but we want the puppy gone. So I move back onto my texture workspace, and with my clone stamp tool, you can just hit C to access that. I'm just going to sample from kind of wherever. And what's left of that puppy magically disappears. So the really cool thing about this, since I've separated the texture completely from the image, I can kind of just sample from anywhere. Did you see I hit the sample point up here? That is a totally different color, totally different luminosity. And that works. If I had tried to do that on this flat layer, you know, you get what you'd expect. It would be the same brightness and color as that area up there. But since I've separated the texture from the tone, I can just kind of pull from anywhere. So check this out. This isn't correct, but this demonstrates that I can pull texture from anywhere and what it looks like. See, if I pull that sharp texture in from down here, this is what it looks like. If I pull soft texture from over here by setting my sample point, that's what it looks like. Now, so that shows you still have to be cognizant of where you are sampling from, but it just really frees up the process to be a lot less painful. And I'm just doing a little bit of tidying. So puppy's gone. And that still looks pretty natural around this edge of the grass where the focal quality is changing. So I think that next, I just want to show you guys what the steps are to make that yourself. I'm going to give you my action. So if you don't want to go through these steps, you don't have to. You can run my action every single time just with the default settings. And generally, you're going to get a pretty good result because I've set it up so that it's as easy as possible. But if you want to understand what's going on under the hood, I'll show you. So this comes out of a system, like I said, called frequency separation. And what I've never liked about that is nobody describes their photograph in terms of frequency, right? You don't go to your friend and be like, hey, what do you think about the frequency in my shot here? I think about it in terms of texture and tone. We can all describe that to each other. We know what texture and tone are. So one of the great things about all of these tools is that they do work on a lot of different types of imagery, and that's what's important for me. So what I got here is this automotive shot. There's some reflection stuff in here. You know, automotive is generally pretty touchy stuff to retouch because it's so reflective. And I really kind of describe it as that. It's basically reflective retouching rather than automotive retouching. So a lot of those concepts can also transfer to like beverage retouching too, or even architectural. You've got a lot of windows, a lot of stuff is going on, a lot of smooth gradients. And that's one thing that this methodology of separating texture and tone really, really works well for. So what I'm going to do is duplicate my layer by hitting Command J and Command J again. So I'm just going to call this my texture layer. I'll just call this my tone layer. So I'm setting this up. So what I want to do is not blur the texture in this image. What I want to do is completely remove it because I want this tone layer to be texture free. Where a lot of people get frequency separation wrong, I think, is that they use Gaussian blur, which basically moves pixel information around by blurring it, which is not what we want here. What I want is the information removed, the texture removed from this tone layer, but not moved around. I want to keep all of my edges, but remove textural detail. So the filter that's great at that is median. I find myself often using like a 5 or a 6 value here. Click. Let's go 6. I can use a preview, see before and after, and you see what that texture is. It's coming off. I'm going to click OK. So there's my tone. But how do I fix this texture layer? Basically, I just want to keep all the texture on this texture layer, but I want to remove all of this information, all of these pixels, all of this tone layer from this. So there is a very esoteric tool in Photoshop called Apply Image, and I don't want you to worry too much about all the possibilities within it. The only one we care about right now is subtract. And I'm going to choose my texture layer. Texture layer is selected here. And what I'm telling Photoshop to do, I'm telling it to subtract the tone layer, everything that's in there, from this texture layer. So these are the values. Wait, hold on. Where'd Dennis go? Is Dennis still in here? Dennis, since I run my action all the time, I always forget these values. Is it 2 and 128? Thumbs up if I'm right. Yeah, all right, I got Dennis's approval. See, he's always got my back. He's always there for me. So this looks weird, right? This dialogue looks like it was, built by, some kind of mad scientist someplace. These are the values that work. Let's just say that. So now I've got my texture layer. You can see it in here. So why is it all gray? Okay, well, because Photoshop, when it was processing what I told it to do, subtract everything in this tone layer from this other layer, where it removed stuff, it turned that to 50% gray. All the stuff that it left behind, which is this texture, it tried to preserve the color and the contrast and the quality of that texture. And what we need to do in order to see it all come together is change this to a different blending mode, which is linear, just happens to be linear light. Linear light as a blending mode says, oh, anything that's 50% gray, I'm just not going to show. So it shows everything else that's either lighter or darker than 50% gray in a way that reproduces the original mixture of information. So I'm just going to select these two and group them together. So before, after, no change. That's exactly what you want to see when you're separating your texture from your tone. No change. If you see a change, one of the steps was done wrong. And there's a whole lot of stuff out there on frequency separation that you can research. There are different methods. Just know that in my humble opinion, this is the best and most reliable method for executing this that exists. So what I can really do now is not have to worry about that textural information if I want to go in here and just clean up these gradients. I'm going to turn my texture off. And you might be wondering what tool I'm using right now. This is the most incredible tool for working on tone, and it's called the mixer brush. I'm not cloning. I'm just scrubbing. This is like actually polishing the car. So I'm working quick, but you can see I just eliminated a lot of painful cloning really quickly. I can also like improve lines. It's pretty nice. So if I messed anything up, I can go back and fix stuff. Now the mixer brush, okay, it hides underneath your regular brush tool. This is the second key component to working in a texture separated mindset. We're going to be working with the stamp tool and the mixer brush mostly, also the healing brush a bit. So if I paint on my tone layer with the regular brush, yeah, it does what you would expect. And you can actually use this tool I'm going to turn my texture back on. You know, if I found a way to isolate this tire and be very careful about it, you can see I just painted orange underneath the texture layer and it kept some of that texture on top. So think about that. That's a very, very useful way to fix certain problems. There we go. But the mixer brush is really cool because what it allows me to do is just move. You making fun of me? It's just move pixel information around. So let's see something else that I want to fix. Show you what this does first in a really, really blunt way. Basically, it just pulls information, pulls those pixel values around. And if you scrub back and forth, it blends them. This is really just like a blender pen if you've ever done artwork in, you know, using pen and ink or with a paintbrush. Basically, if you just went in there and started smudging wet paint, that's essentially what we're doing here. And since we're dealing with tone, it's really great because it's already pretty soft. And that allows me to move really, really quickly with this tool because the texture is still keeping all of that detail together. I don't have to worry really about screwing up any of that texture because we've separated it. So for instance, if I want to get this stuff out of the window, I'm just using the mixer brush here to eliminate it from my tone layer, which that would be kind of a noodly little clone to have to do if you had to do it using the clone stamp tool. And then on my texture layer, I go back to the clone stamp tool and, you know, I can sample from kind of anywhere in the image and remove that. Works great for stuff like this. There's the sign in the window that the client asked me to get rid of. Boom, it's gone. So how does this fit into a workflow? Where does it go? Basically, once I'm done editing my shots in Camera Raw, Lightroom, or Capture One and move into Photoshop, if I don't have any more color or compositing to do. I'll do my compositing first if I've got to do some kind of compositing that, you know, involves bringing in a different photograph. But beyond that, once my photo is in Photoshop, I'm happy with the grade that I processed in, you know, my raw processor. I'm immediately running my separation action, because these days, after using this for so long, I know that the next step is going to be cleanup. Cleanup, or, you know, getting rid of objects from the scene. And that is always best done using a separated image. In some cases, it may save you 10 minutes. In most cases, it'll save you much more than that. And in a lot of cases, it's the absolute only way to get some of the heavy lifting we have to do in Photoshop done. So if you're familiar with frequency separation, you might be going, all right, that's cool. These are some new tools that I hadn't worked with before. If you're totally brand new to frequency separation, you know, this could seem still pretty complicated. I'm just curious what you guys think. If you have any questions, I'd like to stop now and answer them, because I'm going to move on to showing you how this can be used on a couple of different subjects in the same exact way.
Ajmo, ako neko ima pitanja, bilo bi lepo da mu postavite, iskoristi dok je čovjek tu. So, please, if somebody has some questions, I think now is the time.
Can you talk a little bit about the mixer brush settings you need to use?
Yeah, exactly. The mixer brush settings. I pretty much leave these all alone by default, although this one, wet, is kind of like opacity. What I want to do is make sure that this is not turned on.
You got to share your screen.
Oh, you guys can't? You're not in the room with me? I thought you were here in Portland, so okay. Sharing screen. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I basically leave all of these numerical settings alone. I just leave their default setting. Wet is very similar to opacity, sort of like a strength. That one I will change when I need a lighter touch. Don't worry about any of this business. These two guys here are important. This one, you have to make sure that is not clicked. Let's load the brush. Make sure that's not clicked, and make sure this stays clicked, because that just cleans the brush in case it had any pixels picked up from previous settings. So it's really not a complicated tool to use. The only setting really that ever changes is this sort of opacity setting. Well, so there's a question about median, which is a good one. Median is a filter that generally discriminates between edges and texture very, very well. And that's what Gaussian blur does not do. And so if I was to use the mixer brush or any of the tools on the tone, after I used Gaussian blur to remove or blur the texture in that process you saw me do, I would get really weird artifacting around the edges of things, because it's changing the way that those two components interact too much. So median, blurring stripes. Now that's not what I would expect from median. in fact, I would expect median as that separation filter to really respect the edges of stripes, because those are generally going to be hard edges. So my only guess that if it blurred stripes in an image, maybe it was being applied at too high of an amount. So it sounds like there's some interest in Mixer Brush because it's probably a new tool for everyone, or for most people, because up until I started using this methodology, which is now going on probably 8 to 10 years, Mixer Brush was a tool that I thought was just for like fine artists, like you would use it in a creative application. I had no idea it was such a powerful technical tool. So what I'm going to do is show you how it's going to work on someone's skin, which if you are a portrait photographer, wedding, maternity photographer, you're probably going to get a lot of requests from people to make adjustments to skin, to damaged skin, to you know, blemishes. This is really an incredible tool for fixing common problems with skin. Cool. So this is another shot by my friend Jade Webb. This really fantastic shot, but there are some skin issues that the client wanted fixed on her chest. And I'm going to show you how quick and easy that can be. So I'm just going to run my action. I pretty much never go through the manual steps of creating this anymore. So yeah, that does a good job of taking the texture off. So one thing you're probably noticing here is that median came up twice. That's because in my action, there's sort of a backup median. What that does is it removes any extra little aberrations in the image that the first median produced. There's sometimes a little bit of artifacting. It doesn't change the way the image looks, and it doesn't degrade the image, but it's just a result of the math that median does. So the second one you can also use if the first one didn't do it enough. You could really crank it up and apply some more. But I usually keep these settings really, really low on the second one. Usually goes 6/4. One thing I'm also going to do on this image is explain a little bit more about the layers that I have here, because they are definitely different than the layers in the last image where you saw me produce that separation manually. So texture, tone, and I've labeled these. This texture workspace, this is the layer where you're going to do your texture work. Tone workspace, this is where you're going to do your tone work. So I usually look at the tone first, because any things I want to fix on the tone are really quick and easy to do when I switch to the mixer brush. So see the movement of the cursor. I'm just making these small, scrubby little motions. It's literally the best term I have to describe it is scrubbing. Let me close this. Now you don't want to overdo it. You need to look out for over smoothing skin. It's the main error that new users of these tools are guilty of. But I'm also going to show you how to fix that if you did push it too far. So it's not looking really extra natural on the tone layer. It's still holding the shape and the form of the body. That's what you want to preserve when you're working on figures, when you're working on portraits, is preserving some of the variation and the structure of the body, because once you start messing too much with that, people just notice that really, really easily, and they call it out as fake. But I mean, can you imagine having to dodge and burn that? I mean, those initial results, I mean, that took me just a minute or two, you know, and if I move into the face, removing any blemishes becomes really, really fast. So let's look at that texture. So with the texture back on, there's before, after, before, after. So then there's just a little bit of stuff left over. I can just clean up with the clone stamp. And the thing that's really important to me here is preserving some natural texture while removing pixels that look like blemishes. Because skin really does have plenty of variation and texture to it, and that's part of it continuing to look realistic even after you've retouched it. People notice that right away because there have been so many bad actors in retouching who have done really bad stuff to people's faces and bodies, and they should be called out, because what we want to do with our photographs of people, and this is what I say a lot that helps photographers understand how to talk about manipulating photographs of bodies. So what we're trying to do is improve the conversation between our photograph and our viewer. Because when we're able to just peel away a little bit of the pixel information that stands in the way of connecting with the photo of the person. Photograph like this is not meant to show this woman on that specific day at that specific time. This photograph is meant to document this story of her. You know, when we're talking about journalistic photography, okay, that's fine. That's meant to document a very specific moment. Therefore, every single authentic part of that photograph needs to remain. But this is serving a different purpose. This is art. And so as long as we're respectful to the individual, we're not manipulating them in an inauthentic way. But what we're doing is just trying to remove some of the stuff that gets in the way of us connecting with the subject in the photograph. And the things that get in the way of that are blemishes, sun damage, color variation, stuff like that. So you can see, I mean, that was a 10-minute retouch or so, pretty quick. Let's say in here that it maybe still looks a little bit soft, and that's just a common thing. So the problem with that is that I removed some of the natural variation in the skin underneath the texture, underneath the texture on the tone. So still keeps the structure, but I want a little bit of texture back in there. So I just created a new layer here. And I'm going to call that skin texture. And I'm going to go to a different brush in my regular brush. So see, mixers down here. I switch back to my regular brush. Now I have this fantastic brush here, call my skin texturizer. Now what that's going to do is lay down a very light amount of skin texture to add back in there. So what I'm going to do is sample a color somewhere in the light range around here. And with a really low opacity, I'm just going to paint a little bit back in to this area. So this is pretty subtle. I'm going to zoom in. So you see this texture here? What that's doing is really effectively helping to bring back some of the reality into the skin. The other thing that's nice, and notice this is below the texture. I can still add more textural elements in between the tone and the texture. I like what's going on in the texture. I just want to add a little bit more back into the tone. So I'm going to bring up the opacity of this so you can really see it. This brush can also be used sort of as a dodge and burn brush as well in order to improve form. Now I'm really going over the top here. Check out what I'm doing with sampling different areas of skin tone. I can paint in tons of texture that from a distance leads to enhanced form. But it helps to solve the problem of that softness that was happening in the chest. Now, we were working on the skin, but there's also a bunch of stuff in the fabric here that needs to be smoothed out. And this is another place where working on your image with two separate components is really, really fast and powerful. So I'm turning my texture off on my tone, going back to my mixer brush. Now, I don't know about you, but I would not want to have to dodge and burn these folds in the fabric. So what makes it really incredible is being able to just wipe these folds completely away. Let me turn the texture back on. So before, after. Let's see here, before, after. So I can make really big moves in here too. I can change a lot of the quality of these folds in the fabric. So if your client asks you to really smooth this stuff out, what before probably seemed pretty terrifying or just a flat out no, now becomes pretty easy and actually enjoyable. I mean, this is one of the parts of retouching now that I really actually enjoy that I previously hated, is smoothing out creases and folds in fabric. Just makes it so much more of like an expressive act. Makes it more creative. So you might be thinking that you have to be some kind of Picasso to do this stuff. It's really not required that you are an artist here. You're just pushing these pixels around. All I'm doing is smoothing them. And if you ever need to go back and change some of the stuff you did, you can add a mask to this layer here. Choose your brush for your mask. Make sure it's on black. And mask back out some of the work that you did.
Sef, just Dennis asked, when smoothing wrinkles, you do still need to work on the texture too, but it's so much simpler than before. So
much simpler, yeah. That was one of the big revelations, definitely. What this is doing is hopefully not doubling the work for you, because that's something that Dennis also had mentioned when we were talking, is he always sort of puts up a red flag when using frequency separation. If he finds that he has to like almost do double the work because he's got two components, right? If he has to do a whole bunch on the tone and then he has to go and sort of do it again on the texture, that's a clue to him that either he's maybe done too strong of a median, or in that particular case, maybe frequency separation isn't the thing that he needs to use. For me, those situations are pretty few and far between. I usually find if I get the right settings, and usually that setting of 6 on most photographs, if I've got the right setting, I can do what I need to do every time. Cool. So did I leave anybody behind? Are there any questions that you guys have that I haven't covered? The settings for that skin brush, that's great. So what I'm going to do is also on frequencyseparation.com, which is my website, which kind of goes to show how much I like it. I'm going to put up that action, and I'll also put up some of these brushes for you guys too, because what I've got in my brush pack is also, so you can just use the regular old brushes. These are the general brushes. But I've got also these base mixer brushes, which if you're on any other tool and you click on one of these brushes, it's going to bring up the mixer brush here. Like you could be on crop or something on the crop tool. If you click this brush, it's going to load the mixer with all of the base settings, so you don't have to do it. And then I have some skin brushes here that are, I don't think they're even out there in the wild right now. So I think I'll put those up for you guys. The skin texturizer, basically all it is. I'll show you what it looks like. It's just that, essentially. So you could potentially make your own. The setting, I think it has some shape dynamics, like it spins. There's a little bit of variation in it. There's some spacing. So yeah, if you don't want to make your own, I'll help you. I'll give you guys these brushes. One other cool one that I have here, in order to avoid some of that textural problems that we can run into, is I actually have a skin cleaning brush that is texturized. And let me see if I can show you what that does. This is kind of what I use most of the time for cleaning up skin. Let me see if I can find an area where we can really see that at work. So I'll do a big one so you can see what it looks like. It pushes that data like that. It pushes that tonal information like that. So that can really save me a ton of time. Let me zoom out maybe so you guys can see better. So I can really clean up. I mean, this is one thing that my friend Jade runs into all the time, because she's doing almost 100% maternity. And I mean, we all know with, you know, those dramatic changes to the body in maternity, there are lots of issues that once in a photograph, people can be really self-conscious about. And she gets requests constantly to fix, to change the qualities of skin. And that's partially when I was showing her some of these tools. She was like, oh my God, Sef, you've cut my time in Photoshop down to just a fraction. And I mean, that's the whole point with all of this, is to save us all time and pain, because the old way of doing stuff is time consuming, not a whole lot of fun, and there were some things that you just couldn't do. So let's look at before and after on that. That's pretty dramatic change. Let me turn the texture back on just so we have something holding it together. I mean, pretty good. That to me, if I could do that in 10 minutes, that's money in the bank for me. One thing I also want to show you is this is a modular system, okay? What does that mean, modular? That means that I can plug different layers and tools into this. So this is so that was basically 101. And you probably saw that when I was turning stuff on and off, the reason for these extra layers is so I can see really good, easy before and afters, right? So if I only had one texture layer here and I was doing all my work on this, to see before and after, if I try to turn it on and off, it just turns all of the texture on and off. So what I've got now is this layer, because this is the texture original, that allows me to see before and after of any of the work that I did on the texture. Same thing goes for the tone workspace layer, before and after. Because otherwise, if I turn the whole thing on and off, I just see the original image with both the texture and the tone on a single layer. That's not what I want. Also, the tone original allows me, because it's a smart object and median is applied with smart filters, I can double click if I ever need to and just go back. I just double clicked on this smart filter median and I can see what my settings were, because it keeps those settings in there. That's really cool. So the modularity of this system, excuse me, I can plug in this pixel layer, skin texture. I can plug in an adjustment layer in this area where I could colorize only what's below it, the tone, and leave the texture totally alone. I can add a curve and only change the tone and leave the texture completely alone. See the difference? So it's going to give you more options for making adjustments to the image. One of the ones that I use the most is what I call a hue control. So what I'm going to do is I just create a new pixel layer, call it hue control, and I'm going to change the blending mode to hue. And with my soft round pressure size brush, the regular brush that ships with Photoshop, I'm going to sample a color. So you see here, like, her belly is pretty like rosy. I think what I'm going to do is increase the saturation of the image just for demonstration purposes so we can see. Okay. So check this out. Here it's pretty red, and then as it moves back in here, it starts to get more dull. Okay. Her arm here is actually much more orange than her stomach here. And her armpit is a little bit more dull, desaturated. Her face is actually even approaching like yellow here. So that's one thing that we really are often tasked with, is controlling hue variation in skin, because it can be distracting. The camera captures that really well. In some cases, it even enhances that hue variation. So with this hue control layer, notice it's underneath the texture still. I can just, with my brush, hold down Alt, and let's say I want this area of the stomach to be the similar color. I'm going to make sure that I am on current and below. I just hit my sampler tool, because this is important to know. We need to be on current and below, and I'll usually set it to something like 5 by 5, because when I'm working in my brush tool, if I hold down Alt, it changes it to the color sampler tool, and you can see that come up in the sampling ring. So that's kind of my target hue that I want. And since this is set to hue, I can just paint in there and control the hue. I'm going to turn that on and off. It's a subtle variation still. You can mostly see it up in here, where it turns from sort of yellow to red. Let me see if I can get it to show up a little bit more pronounced in some of these other areas. Okay, you probably were able to see that. Before, after. So you can really move around the image and target different hues, such as now her face looks really yellow to me. Before, after, before, after, before, after. Great. So what do you guys think? Do you think that's something that you would be able to use in your own photography? Are these problems that you run into regularly? Any of this stuff you've already done before? Yes, I'm using the texturized brush as a mixer brush. That's a good question. Thank you. A lot of people don't know that. Like, first of all, mixer brush is like a brand new thing, but mixer brush, you can use all sorts of different brushes with it. So what I've done is created a whole set of tools that also work as mixer brushes. Texturized brush tips are incredible. You can get a ton of them for free from Adobe, or you can make your own. That's a good question from Alexander. So I do some color grading within this texture separated layer group, but only insofar as it really applies to either the texture or the tone. So once I need to move into actual color grading after that, I'm going to go on top of everything. But if I have to target either that texture or that tone, I'll go back in there. And that's like the beauty of it, is you can have an entire color layer group on top for your color grading, and then you can jump back into your separation layers at any time. Yeah, banding. I have a great action for dealing with banding. Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, totally. So this, you know, there is a case for using this for banding too, because if you can imagine, let's say you have a seamless backdrop that's sort of uniform, and it's got a texture, it's got a tooth to it. If you can imagine that, you know, you could use these texture brushes to mix away the bands even. But if you extract the texture from the tone, then you're not blurring the texture. That's the whole, you know, that's the whole takeaway. It's so versatile. Cool. So requests. Does anybody have anything else that they might like to take a look at? Are there any specific problems that like anybody's having with their images that you just can't get around, that you just avoid? You know, I'm always curious to hear what really scares photographers or troubles them about going into Photoshop, why they avoid it. Because there's usually some kind of solution that that's always there that will get it to good enough. Yeah, color grading is is something that I've spent a lot of time doing, and then also a lot of time teaching, trying to figure out what to do with color grading can often be a big challenge. It's been a challenge for me. Like, I got my own photograph. Okay, like, how do I grade that? What choices do I make? What I always start with, and I've got a linear workflow for this too. I like workflows that I can rely on every single time from start to finish and not have to use up a bunch of brain power figuring out recreating the wheel every day. So what I do is I look at what are the colors in my image right now, and what can I do to change them to create a color harmony. So what that requires is first understanding a little bit of color theory and color harmony. It's really not rocket science. And I actually have a book that I recommend called Color Choices. I've got a kit page that actually has it. Okay, I just put that in the chat. But understanding color harmony, you basically got analogous, complementary, or like a split complementary, which is often called a compound. Basically, I would look at, I'm going to bring up an image. Here, check this one out. So this is a landscape that I worked on for a photographer, Canadian photographer named Peter Leverman. So I had to look at this photograph and say, what is going on here? You know, how are we going to grade this? What's the color that we're going to bring out? This is the finished version. So what's the dominant hue? Like, my dominant hue here is green, yeah? So I know from just reading a little bit about color theory that the dominant hue in an image should be fairly desaturated, especially in a landscape. And all of the hues around it, around that dominant hue, should be very close to it, like this, you know, sort of aqua turquoise. It's pretty close to the green. And then this more yellow, light yellow, is also pretty close to the green. That was intentional. These hues were adjusted to all family together into sort of an analogous range. So that was the choice that I made with that. Let's bring the yellows and the blues closer to that green. And what I did with the rest of the image, I mean, this is pretty neutral in the area of the town here. But what I did was really shift and control and pop all of these reds, because those are complements. Those are complements to green. And what I did was I sort of familyed those all together and made sure those reds were kind of in the right spot so that they're not a bunch of very different reds, because that helps me reinforce that complementary color harmony. I love this image. You can like zoom right in and like look at people watching TV. So an image like this, you know, it's a landscape, but it was treated as a commercial image by me. And this is the way that I break things up with all of these different isolations. And I know somebody in the chat said I hate masking, and I believe you. It's not easy. So you can imagine, I just have these layers up here to show how I break an image apart, because I want everything in an image to be broken out into a layer group of its own with a mask on it. Because I've gone through too much pain on too many images where I thought I could just get away with targeting different areas. Once you make big contrast changes between different areas of the image, if you've got masks, you're going to end up with edges. And trying to fix those can be so painful that you just end up painting yourself into a corner and you can't change anything further. So this is the second one I wanted to have, you know, because as I said, I was changing the hues of a lot of these areas. So I wanted to have the ocean separate. And then finally, I wanted to have the mountain separate because this back here was not the actual sky in the image. Peter had a different shot of a sky that he wanted to use, and so I had to get that in there and make it look real. So these masks were all made using the tools that I showed you on that first image, that very first image we looked at. I first isolated these areas with a selection, and then I used that refine edge brush in select and mask to fix that edge. Link to kit is not valid. Okay, I'll look into that. Oh, it's kit.co. They changed it. Sorry, that auto corrected. There you guys go. Yeah, so if you hated masking, hopefully some of these tools that you've seen here are going to make it a little bit easier for you. I'm curious if the object selection tool will recognize this foreground element for me. That's pretty good. I just used the object selection tool. Hold up, let me share my screen. So I just used the object selection tool, and I just dragged a marquee around this foreground element just to see. And it did a pretty good job of starting. And then I can go into, oh, select and mask. I need to be on the layer to go into select and mask. There you go. And so I've got the, yeah, I've got the refine edge brush selected. And this is what I did on this real job, what, 5 years ago, something like that. So check that out. I'm going to change the view mode. Pretty good. So I'm doing it live right now. Yeah, so I mean, it's a start. You can go back in and you can adjust these, just some of these little errors later, but man, that's a time saver, because I'm not going to like paint that mask or anything. I would have to be a sadist to like try to do that by hand. Yeah, it's great for hair. It's incredible for hair. Let's see. So it's 11:41. Why don't really quickly, I wanted to open, you guys want to see a real life Nike job working file. I'm going to close up some of these so I get a little bit more free RAM. Yeah, to wrap up with, I'll show you what a real Sef working file looks like. So this is a job I did, I think maybe like end of last year, something like that. So let's look at the original. I'm gonna bring up the white layer.
Yeah, sorry, can you share your screen?
Oh, geez. I'm killing you guys. Sorry about that. I need like a stream deck or something. Here we go. Cool. All right. So yeah, real life Nike job. So this is what we started with. This is the photograph. And you can see there's a rigging in here. They actually built these really cool props to look like bubble gum, but you can see there's a bunch of reflections and weird stuff going on in here. Plexi surface with some dust and some fuzz. But really great shot. A little bit of lighting on the shoe that needs fixing, and got to remove this stuff. And this is where we ended up. And notice that just like that landscape, I broke everything out into these masks. Now for this, I did not use those tools. I used the pen tool, because when you're on a full-on commercial job, everything's got to be perfect. So I don't know if you can see the paths are blue. They're a little bit thin. You can see here. I clipped these out using the pen tool. So here's how the construction went. I've got this right here, this wall. Now, talking about banding, I'm going to bring up a hue saturation. So what I started with was this clean gradient that I built from what existed in the background. But you might be able to see here there's a bunch of banding, because I used a bunch of blurring and different techniques to get it smoothed out. And so if I try to colorize it to like a bright blue, there's a bunch of banding that ends up occurring in there. And in my final, you can see there's no banding at all. So what I did was I duplicated up my color work. And let's see if I have this loaded up. I wasn't planning on showing the band destroyer today, so I did not have it loaded. Let's see if I can just do it. Remember my manual steps to do this. Okay, so what I do is I apply some grain. Add noise. Enough so that there's a bunch of grain that I can see. I'm just going to use monochromatic. Okay, so I threw a bunch of grain, just slapped it right on this pixel layer. So it kind of takes the bands away, but it doesn't, it's not good enough, okay? So what I'm going to do is run the camera raw filter on this. And I'm going to use Camera Raw's noise reduction tool. And I want to wipe all this noise away in Camera Raw. To be clear, I ran Camera Raw as a filter. Make sure that there's no grain being added. There we go. It was holding texture. So what I want to do is just remove all of the texture that I just added in there. And this is kind of like this is a bit of a from the hip kind of demo here. I wasn't expecting to do this, but these are basically the steps that I've run. I'm going to run that camera raw filter again because it didn't completely smooth it out. And I'll follow up with you guys to, there we go, to get you these actions that I've made. So you can see there, so what I did was I took a really bandy layer, has a bunch of bands in it, and I added noise into it. I brought it into Camera Raw filter. You can run Camera Raw as a filter on any pixel layer. It's really super powerful. And then I told Camera Raw, because Camera Raw is in a completely different bit depth. Once you move into there, it's almost like moving into 16, essentially is. And so what happens when you move into and out of 16-bit is Photoshop's conversion math engine, whatever. When you move back into 8-bit, it applies this dithering effect because it knows from 16 to 8, since it's got so much less data, that there are going to be bands. So it has a really good way of like eliminating that. So that's basically what we're leveraging when we go in and out of 16 and 8-bit. I found that using the noise reduction tools are really, really powerful for stripping out that grain, because it gives it something to sort of sink its teeth into. And then what I'll do is use the Camera Raw filter again on that same layer and add in some grain from Adobe Camera Raw, because I just want a little bit of tooth in there. And that final conversion back into 8-bit out of Camera Raw should eliminate all banding. So from there to there in just a couple steps. Cool, I'm glad that came up. So the wall, that's the wall. The floor. Now, this floor is inside this mask that's on this entire group. What does that allow me to do? Well, it allows me to change the horizon line if I want to by moving the mask. This is the kind of flexibility that I want to see in my files, because the client is going to ask me to change things. And if I build them all up like this, it makes it so that I can so much more easily change stuff. This ball. So it looks like this file has been simplified by me. But this is the setup. Yeah, so I can show you what I did with separation and the color. So that's a big change to the original ball. This one, I think I had some smoothing to do. Yeah, so I used that texture mixer brush here to kind of create a more of a smooth edge that looked real and held some of that texture, and then applied color. Big ball. And I know I did quite a bit of cleanup on this. Yeah, so that was all using that mixer brush technique in my texture separated layer stack. So you can imagine, like, if you had to tackle this, like using cloning and healing, that'd be a huge pain. And then the color. So notice that, like, the color overall was really dialed. So this is what leads to one of those questions about color grading. I was making decisions, first of all, about the overall hue, but I was doing a lot of other stuff too. Like, I wanted bounce. I wanted some bounce off the plexi in here, and I wanted it to be more blue, to bring in some blue into the ball here so that it integrates a little bit more with the background. I also wanted to define that bottom edge. But what I'm trying to do generally is get color into everything. You know, I have a dominant, pretty bright, pretty saturated hue, and another pretty bright pink. So look at the shadows of these. I could tell from the original photograph that the shadows were blocking the light that was hitting the balls. and the blue background was catching into the shadows here, so I enhanced that and brought some of that blue into the front of the ball here and here, so that there was integration. Color can bounce around, and that really helps with integration. So let's see what was done to the shoe. So this is my color work to the shoe, and here's my edits. So this was using my texture separation, and that's quite a lot of cleanup. But back in the day, doing that with just the basic tools on a flat layer, that would have been a big old pain. And then the color work of the shoe to help it pop. So that's just about it. I'm gonna go back to chat over here. See if you guys got anything else. Yeah, I mean, I hope that you look at, you know, that texture separation technique and feel like you might be able to use it, and it might save you some time, because that's, we should all be spending less time in Photoshop, you know, noodling with our images the hard way. And I can tell you, this is the best way we currently have to make changes to our photographs. You guys have any more questions? Anything going on? I know that was kind of a lot of ground to cover.
Sorry, Sef, I have one question. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
How much time in average do you spend retouching one set, one image, something like this Nike shot?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and it's usually as much as I can stand. This Nike image, I think, probably was I'd say 7 or 8 hours.
Wow.
And that really only happens in a situation where you have a client like this and you have the budget like this, because that doesn't happen in one sitting. What I do is I get it to round 1 and then hand it off to the team. They hit me back with changes. I'm also looking at it during that time, and that maybe that takes a day, maybe that takes 2 days. This project consisted of 4 key images like this, and then a number of detail images. So a project like that usually runs for 2 or 3 weeks. So that time is spaced out over multiple rounds and multiple reviews.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Do I use Nick collection? You know what? I don't really use any filters in my work unless I'm doing color grading explorations. Nick can be great for that. The problem is that if you process your image initially for color grading using a filter, you're basically locked into that. And for some jobs that's okay, but for me, the nature of this work makes it so I have to retain the most flexibility I can possibly have. So what I might do is use a Nick filter to find something that I can get approved with my client, that they say, yeah, that's the color direction that I want to go with. That's the look. And then what I do is I recreate that using adjustment layers in Photoshop, so that I can continue to tweak those, because they're going to ask me to change it. Yeah, so that's a really good question. If there is a situation where you're unable to make the requested change to the image, totally. And that's one of the scariest things for working with clients, especially starting out, is, you know, they may ask you, clients will ask for ridiculous things. Like, you know, they might say, hey, can we see the other side of the shoe? You know, those types of requests, they happen, but it's easy to know, like, yeah, I can't change time and space. You know what I mean? Like, this is not a 3D photograph. This is a photograph. We only shot this side of the shoe. I can't turn the shoe. But it's everything in between there that's like really hard to know when to say no and when to be confident with, like, you can't do that. That just comes with experience, because it's easy to worry that, oh, well, if I say no, they might go to somebody else and they go, oh, totally. Yeah, I can do that. I still run into those situations where I have to say no, and I'm able to do it pretty confidently. I would say just with experience and learning as much as you can allows you to say no with confidence. Or sometimes saying no with confidence, even though you're not totally sure, really helps, because even when clients are asking for changes that may be possible, sometimes they ask for changes that are not in their own self-interest, that actually don't make the image better, they just make it different. I'd say look out for that, and, you know, if you're not scared and you don't seem unsure of yourself, you might help them from making a bad decision.
You have one more question from Dragan.
Sure. Yeah, so I do not charge hourly for my work. That's not perfect for everybody, but I really charge for a project, per project, or kind of a per image rate. Because if you get anyone asking you how much do you charge per hour, that's more for if you were going to become a freelance retoucher and go and work at their office. That I could see happening, but I have people ask me, what do I charge per hour? And I go, well, I don't go on site to work. I work in my own studio. So there's no reason you need to know an hourly rate, because I'm not punching a clock. I'm finishing a job. And so I always say, you know what, tell me more about the project, because if I just throw out some kind of random hourly rate, that's almost surely going to change, and it doesn't really mean anything to you. So that's when I go on a fact-finding mission, knowing more about the project, how many images, what are the deliverables. And I myself, in my head, I go, okay, well, this one image is probably going to take me this many hours. There are this many images. How much do I want to make per hour? And I'll give them a project rate. And I include changes within that project rate, usually 2 revisions. So first round, then they can come back with some changes. Second round, come back with final changes, approved. You should be able to get to an approved finished product in that many rounds. So once I give them that project rate, I go, you can be pretty reliable. You can rely on the fact that this is probably pretty accurate and it's not going to change. So you don't have to worry about money anymore unless you ask for something that's a big change in the scope of the project. And I'll be sure to alert you if I see anything that looks like that. Clients usually really appreciate that, because at the end of the day, you haven't had to haggle with them. You deliver the product and hopefully they pay you right away, and that's it. It's done.
Any other questions?
Cool. I would say also, like, I would love to continue, you know, these discussions after this, because questions might come up, and I'm going to show you how we can do that. So these are the ways that we can continue to communicate. So I run frequencyseparation.com, which is my humble little corner of the internet, but I'm using it as a platform for producing tools to help people do retouching on their photographs. So if you just register there, all you got to do is put in your email. You'll get a link to download the frequency separation action that I made. And I'm working on that site to host some more tools such as brushes and other actions. So you'll get
share
email.
Screen, please.
I promise this
Screen
is the last
shared.
time. I promise this is the last time you're going to have to ask me to share my screen. You guys seeing that? So register there. You're going to get emails. Next is the Facebook group. And we've got a community of like really, really smart and helpful and cool photographers and retouchers there. Really, really high quality discussions go on there. It's just a great group of people. And then I do have a fledgling YouTube channel where I have some tutorials up that cover techniques, tools, and culture around image work.
Sef, sorry, we only see the screen where Photoshop is opened. We don't see the other one.
All right. Did I fix it?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, guys. Thanks for your patience. But yeah, I hope you guys are able to do at least one thing in Photoshop that you weren't able to do previously with some added confidence.
Okay, I think that we are finished for tonight.
Yeah. Well, this is great. I'm glad I got to show some of these techniques. Thanks for the questions because they help me show things that I would not have normally thought of to show. Yeah, just, you know, I'm there hanging out in that Facebook group pretty regularly. So if you guys think of stuff later, go ahead and hit me up or ask some of the other members there.
I just must to thank you so much for this.
Yeah.
It's really an honor to have you here. And I want to thank all of you because this workshop is the final workshop of this year's FOTORAMA. So thank you so much for being part of it. So
totally, it's my pleasure. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate all you guys.
So we have one tradition, so we can make one group photo. So everybody, please turn on your cameras for one last time for this year's FOTORAMA. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. I think we have Mayo. Yeah, Mario. Okay, I think
we do it.
Maybe few more, but okay. So 3, 2, 1, cheese. One more. 3, 2, 1, now. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hvala vam ljudi puno. ovim završavamo ovogodišnju fotoramu, ali ne završavamo sve vezano za fotoramu. Vidjet ćemo se na nečemu što se zove Fotorama Extended, bit će za tačno mesec dana i bacit ćemo se na nešto što se zove konceptualna fotografija i imat ćemo dva nova predavača. Ali kažemo o tom potom, javljam sve na vreme. Once more, thank you all for everything. Sef, thank you so much and see you soon.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye bye. Dennis, bye.
Bye bye.
Dennis, Mario. See
Thank
you
you,
later.
Sef. Good to see you both.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
I miss you guys.
Ciao.
Miss you too, bro.
Oh yeah. Gotta connect soon.
Yeah, totally. Have to make a Skype call.
Okay.
Right, guys.
I'm going to end it. And
Okay, okay.
Wait.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Marco. This is the last session, right? And
Yeah.
You did it.
you
did
yeah.
it. You did it.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. But without you,
Hats off to Marco.
yeah,
That's right.
this one, yeah. Mm.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
This one.
Yeah, but my puny brain was cooked tonight, so I must.
All good.
You need to let it cool off, huh?
Yeah, because I don't have any isolation, you know. I'm purely bold. I like the Homer Simpson.
Yes.
So
Well, hopefully we all get to hang out together in person next year.
I really hope so that this shit of COVID will end soon. So
Man, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Cool.
thank you guys so much.
Be safe.
See you soon,
Thanks to you.
Dennis. See you soon. Bye bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye everybody.